It's the roaring 1920s. World War I has ended and the American economy is rapidly growing. But while everyone else is partying, one mysterious stock trader has locked himself inside his office for weeks on end, secretly preparing for the event that would send America into its darkest times in history, and which on October 29th would forever change the global economy in ways no one could have imagined. As a boy, this trader ran away from the family farm to become rich and save his parents from poverty. And although people laughed at him at the time, he was determined to become the best trader in history. But his journey would take him to very dark places, where he would be blamed for the suffering of an entire country. And in the end, things would never be the same. This is the inspiring but dark story of Jessie Livermore. In Massachusetts in the 1880s, life was challenging for a young boy named Jessie Livermore, who worked hard to help his struggling family on their farm, although he was too weak and skinny to do anything of value. But in grammar school it was a different story, and Jessie's talent for math quickly became evident as he sped through 3 years of math coursework in just a single year. By age 5, he was already reading and writing at an advanced level, a gift that would later be both a blessing and a curse. These skills didn't matter much when working on a farm, and for Jessie, each day felt the same. He felt lost and without purpose. That was until something happened that lit a fire in him and changed everything. When Jessie one day got his hands on a copy of the Boston newspaper, it was like looking through a window to a different world. Until that moment, his life was all about dirt, crops, and endless farm tasks. But this newspaper showed him another side of life. Well-dressed people at big events, reports of business achievements in the city, and images of famous people living it up in luxurious homes, enjoying lively parties with music and dance. It was a life Jessie didn't even know existed, but now he wanted to be a part of it. And he dreamed of handing his struggling mother a pile of cash and imagined a day when everyone would recognize his name. Everyone else believed Jessie's dreams were just wishful thinking, and they laughed at his hopes of one day being wealthy, thinking he would soon wake up to reality and follow in his family's footsteps as a farmer, with the other kids even bullying him for being so different and making them look bad. To be fair, Jessie had no idea how to achieve his dreams, but he knew he would never become famous if he kept plowing plots for the rest of his life. So at the age of 14, when his father forced him to quit grammar school to help him out even more at the farm, Jessie knew the time had come for him to escape, and without telling his father, without any kind of plan, he ran away to Boston with only a couple of dollars in his pocket. Deep down, he believed that he would find a way to become wealthy and support his family. He had no idea that he had pulled himself into a world he would never be able to return from, with a future much darker than he could have imagined. Without any formal training or past experience, Jessie had to find a way to make money so he doesn't end up homeless and alone in Boston. So with a mix of fake confidence and natural charm, he walked straight into the office of Boston's top stock brokerage firm, meaning a company that acts like a middleman between the buyers and sellers of different stocks, like an old version of the Fidelity, Vanguard, or Robinhood that we have today. At the brokerage firm, Jessie landed a job updating stock prices, where he would erase old prices and write down new ones on a blackboard. Earning $6 a week, he started his role as one of these so-called board boys. At first, Jessie only viewed these different stock prices as random numbers he had to write down, but after a while he started seeing something much deeper in them. These prices actually reflected values of different American companies, and they changed with particular patterns, which meant that if anyone could just correctly guess if the price would go up or down, they could be making money. Slowly, Jessie started to realize that stock trading was like the perfect game, and although he knew nothing right now, it was a game he could beat one day. It wouldn't be easy, but this could be his ticket to millions of dollars and the freedom and fame he had dreamed of. And suddenly, just like that, he had decided to dedicate his entire life to becoming the best trader the world has ever seen. And so Jesse's real journey had begun, and he had to figure out how these stock traders actually made money. So he started listening closely to the conversations of the different traders at the office. He obsessively looked through every page of the financial section of the newspaper and did everything he could to understand how a business works. He learned that as a trader he could either make money by going long or buying something at a lower price and selling it when it's worth more, or by short selling, which is about borrowing a stock, selling it immediately and then hoping to buy it back cheaper, making money if the value goes down. Jesse was particularly drawn to short selling because it represented a contrarian approach, going against the grain of popular opinion and betting on the downfall of a stock. While working as a board boy at a brokerage firm, the 15-year-old Jesse spent every waking moment of his days learning about the stock market and the secrets of trading. And as his confidence grew, he started to give out tips to different traders in the office. For example, one day telling them that they should buy stocks in copper mining companies because he thought the price of copper was going to go up. And mostly through luck, he was even right a couple of times. And soon the 15-year-old started to get liked by the other traders, who almost saw him like a teenage stock guru. It was Jesse's first taste of fame, but it was enough to get him addicted, an addiction that would cause him big problems later in life. After a year of working as a board boy and learning the stock market, Jesse felt ready. It was time to stop giving out tips and start trading himself. So one day, when he didn't have to go to work, Jesse and his friend went out to trade by themselves. And nervously he risked $10 of his own hard-earned money on a bet that the stock of American railroad company Burlington would go up. $10 was almost 2 weeks of hard work for Jesse, so when he saw Burlington skyrocket in price, it was an indescribable feeling. Jesse had made $3 of profit in just a couple of minutes, just by making the correct prediction. But Jesse's boss quickly found out about this, and he thought it made the brokerage firm look bad if its employees went out to gamble on their free time. So he asked Jesse to stop gambling immediately. But Jesse was absolutely hooked. He refused to stop and told his boss that he wasn't gambling, he was trading the market. And with those words, Jesse got fired from his job as a board boy at the stock brokerage firm. And with only a couple of dollars saved up, the now unemployed 16-year-old was determined to never work a regular job again for the rest of his life. With the small amount of money Jesse had saved up, he didn't have nearly enough to trade at a regular brokerage office. So he went to the underground world of trading, the so-called bucket shops, where the line between trading and gambling was very thin. You see, unlike a regular stockbroker, you never actually buy or sell any stocks at the bucket shop. And instead of competing against other traders, you're competing against the bucket shop itself, simply betting with the bucket shop on the future price of a stock, similar to a casino. And as we know, the house always wins, which means that often these places were rigged and manipulated, and the bucket shops could delay updating their stock prices or even simply lie about what the stock price was just to win the money themselves. But Jesse had no other choice, and it was time for him to take on the bucket shops. It seemed a bit scary at first, but in a place where most of the other people were either amateur traders, working class people who wanted some entertainment after a long day's work, or just outright gambling addicts, a 16-year-old Jessie Livermore was already leagues ahead. Jesse had his secret weapon, his uncanny ability to read the tape, which is a continuous roll of paper that printed stock prices for different buy and sell orders, almost like a precursor to today's electronic tickers. By closely looking at these numbers, Jesse could sense the underlying trends of stocks, allowing him to strategically position his place. Recognizing the unique behavior of each stock, he also started to develop new strategies for each one. Sometimes he would do what is called scalping, meaning making numerous small trades to profit from small changes in stock prices. Other times he would ride the momentum of a stock, meaning he would bet on stocks that were already going up or down and ride the wave for as long as possible. However, this success brought a lot of attention, and Jesse's consistent wins as a young boy outsmarting the system system quickly made him stand out. So the bucket shops that were losing money every time he would step in started to ban him. Jessie even tried wearing a disguise to make himself unrecognizable and hide his identity to be able to get into the bucket shops. But after a while, even that stopped working, and Jessie was forced to move on to something bigger. So with a lot more money saved up, Jessie set his sights on New York City and Wall Street to battle against the best traders in the country. But the 16-year-old Jessie had no idea what he was getting himself into. As he was standing on the trading floors of New York City's largest brokerage firms, Jessie had to realize the hard way that his strategy only worked at bucket shops. In the bucket shops, you never made any real orders, so Jessie could, whenever he wanted, bet on a certain price. But regular stockbrokers operated in real time, and you would need to wait until you managed to actually buy a stock before you had the opportunity to sell it. Also, sometimes the trades that showed up on the tape could be 5 to 10 minutes behind the actual trades on the floor, meaning that even Jessie's secret weapon had become useless for making predictions. Before he knew it, Jessie found himself on a losing streak. He was completely outclassed. Humiliated and broken, Jessie was laughed out of New York and went back to making money at different bucket shops, going to places like Indianapolis, St. Louis, and Denver. And because he would quickly get banned, he had to tell other people to walk into the shop and make the trades for him. But despite this, by the year 1900, the now 23-year-old Jessie had already amassed a fortune of $50,000, equivalent to a staggering $1.8 million today. Feeling financially secure, Jessie had also married a woman named Nettie Jordan only a few weeks after they met. And he even returned home to his mother, giving her tons of money. But the dream to conquer Wall Street was still there, and Jessie promised himself to one day return to New York and be recognized as the best trader in the world. It was no longer just about the money and the lifestyle. It was a matter of pride, of being the best at the game of trading, beating the system and proving everyone else wrong. But he had no idea that he was already about to lose everything he had built. Learning from his mistakes while trading in New York, Jessie once again dedicated everything to master the art of trading. He realized it wasn't enough to just read the tape. He needed to create a system and a way to visualize price moves long before they happened. He started off learning the charts, which is a way to see how a stock has behaved over a longer period of time. But he realized that not even the charts could tell a trader what decisions the top leaders of a company would make. Jessie had to dig even deeper, and soon understood that in the end it is the people that decide the price of a company, and that one single press release could hype up a stock so much that it skyrockets in value, and that in a similar manner the government announcing new rules and regulations could cause a market crash. Jessie also realized how extremely manipulated the market is, with traders using dirty tricks and private information to gain an advantage. But to him it didn't matter, he just had to learn to play by their rules. Slowly but surely, Jessie got better and better at trading, where he would just sit and listen and absorb everything he heard from discussions between rich capitalists, financiers, and businessmen. And finally, in 1901, a year after his first big failure, Jessie had now become pretty successful. But he was burning away all his profits going on an expensive trip to Europe, where he bought his wife $12,000 worth of jewelry, equivalent to $420,000 in 2023. Jessie, who was also obsessed with becoming famous, also wanted the entire world to know about his successes. So he purposefully leaked his expensive purchase to different newspapers, which completely backfired and led to him having to pay another $7,200 to the customs officers for failing to declare duty on all the jewelry he had bought. And now Jessie started panicking, realizing that his wallet was almost empty again. So on the same day in 1901, when he got back from a long trip in Europe, Jessie rushed down to Wall Street to make back the money he had spent on the trip. He quickly noticed that stocks had been going up a lot, lot since he was gone and decided that they had become overvalued, so he went and shorted the entire market. But this was a hasty decision and Jesse was acting out of emotion. He was afraid to lose the lifestyle he had gotten a taste of, and he had barely even looked at the stock market during his vacation in Europe, so he had no idea why all the stocks went up in the first place. A mistake that made him lose more and more money as the stock prices kept rising. This could happen pretty quickly for Jesse because he liked to trade with a lot of leverage, meaning he would borrow money from his stockbroker to make even bigger trades. As he kept losing, all the other traders told him to cut his losses by covering his shorts, but Jesse, who had turned into a gambler, just refused to listen to them, until finally he had lost so much money that his stockbroker forced him to buy back the stocks that he had shorted because they were worried he wouldn't be able to pay them back, an action that is known as a margin call. So when the dust finally settled, Jesse had lost all his money. The same traders who had warned him could now only laugh at him, saying that Jesse could only make money at bucket shops, that he was a born loser, and that an insecure man who couldn't control his emotions was simply not made for trading with the professionals in New York. When Jesse returned home, he told his wife that he had lost everything, and that they had to sell her very expensive jewelry to not go broke. But she couldn't believe what she was hearing, and refused to sell any of the jewelry Jesse had bought her. So after an intense shouting match between them, Jesse decided to leave the house, and after 7 years of marriage, also leaving his wife forever. Having gotten a taste of the luxury lifestyle, he was willing to do anything to get it back, and this time he would meet someone who introduced him to a much darker side of trading. In 1905, with no money to trade, a broke 28-year-old Jessie Livermore was approached by a very controversial man who offered him a deal with the devil. His name was Thomas Lawson, and he offered to give Jesse some of his own money for him to trade with. And in return, Jesse had to listen to different buy and sell orders that Thomas would give him. And then they would of course share all the profits Jesse makes. This kind of deal may seem pointless at first, but Thomas Lawson was known for manipulating the markets, collecting inside information about future press releases and announcements, and even personally promoting some stocks after he had bought them himself. But after getting caught a couple of times, he now had to act behind the scenes, and Jesse was the perfect front man he could use as his own puppet. Because at the time, everyone thought Jesse was a loser, and they would never be suspicious of him if he started making money again. Jesse didn't like this idea at all. It was much scarier than trading alone, and he had so much more to lose. But having no other choice, he accepted Thomas's deal to act as his puppet, and then he even accepted another deal to start trading the money of another client. So by the fall of 1905, Jesse now had enough money to return to the trading floors of New York City for his third attempt at beating the professional traders at Wall Street. And suddenly in 1906, Thomas Lawson called up Jesse and told him to short sell the stock of another railroad company called Union Pacific. Jesse didn't hesitate to do it, and using Thomas's money, he started throwing down bets that Union Pacific stock would go down. Thomas asked Jesse to do this because he had some secret information about the company. But Jesse felt like there was something more to it, because he believed that the market in general was overvalued and that Union Pacific stock would be going down regardless. So even when Thomas and Jesse's business partner in New York were both happy with their wins and nervously told Jesse to cover his position and take profits, Jesse only kept on shorting Union Pacific stock. All the other stock traders were excited about this, and they were just waiting for Jesse's short selling to fail, because if Jesse was forced to cover the shorts, he would need to buy an insane amount of Union Pacific stock, which would in turn make the price skyrocket and make all the other bullish traders a lot of money. And deep inside, Jesse was starting to panic. Maybe he had again made the mistake of letting his emotions take control of him. He just needed a catalyst, something that could be the initial spark that would start the fire. And that's when it happened. On April 18th, 1906, the San Francisco earthquake, measuring a staggering 7.9 on the Richter scale and destroying more than 80% of the city, with more than 3,000 people tragically losing their lives. The financial shockwaves went across the United States and all the way to Wall Street, where insurance companies now had to pay out a lot of money to the different victims news of the earthquake in San Francisco. This forced insurance companies to sell off stocks they had invested in, and the stock market, which was already overvalued, started to collapse. But in the middle of this chaos, after sharing his earnings with his partners, Jessie Livermore was left with over $300,000, equivalent to more than $10 million in 2023. All while San Francisco and the global financial scene were in turmoil. Jessie now thought that he had cracked the code of the stock market and mastered the nuances of trading. So after giving a portion of his gains to Thomas Lawson, Jessie took a few months off just to celebrate his achievements and indulge in a life of luxury. Unattached, with no children or spouse, he frequented elite gatherings, showcasing his wealth and success to other business elites. Dressed in the best suits money could buy and often accompanied by different mistresses, Jessie lived a life reminiscent of a modern-day rock star. It was almost like trading was just another way for Jessie to show his superiority. And without the money and admiration, he felt a bit lost, so he couldn't stop himself from again spending everything. In a matter of months, burning through most of his trading gains, he was again forced to return to Wall Street and dove into the next available trade without much analysis, choosing to short Union Pacific stock since it had worked out so well last time. He thought this was a good idea because the market sentiment at the time was positive and many believed that the economy would bounce back after the San Francisco earthquake and that stocks would keep rising. While Jessie, on the other hand, sensed a looming crisis. He would eventually be proven right, but we'll get to that soon. But this time, in his rush to short Union Pacific stock, Jessie had overlooked two critical factors. Firstly, all the bullish investors now knew about Jessie's tricks, and they quickly countered his short selling by buying up even more stock and even teaming up to manipulate the stock price of Union Pacific through some methods which are illegal today. But also, to make things even worse, Union Pacific announced that they would be paying an extra dividend of 10% that year. Companies usually only pay out this kind of extra dividend when they are doing especially well and have a lot of extra cash. So the market thought this was an extremely positive sign for the company's future success, leading to the stock price of Union Pacific rising even more. This meant that Jessie, who was stuck short selling the company, could only watch in terror as all his hard-earned money started to disappear again. This was the second time. Just months earlier, he had made hundreds of thousands of dollars, and this situation was especially frustrating because he could have never predicted the extra dividend announcement unless he had insider information, which it seemed like the other top traders always had. That's when Jessie realized he had still been far too naive. It wasn't enough to research the market and become a master of trading and analyzing the stock price charts. To really win at the game of trading, he had to completely join the dark side. He needed to become an insider himself, someone who knows the next move of a company long before they announce it. Only then could he be on the same level as the top traders. So with that realization, Jessie approached his business partner again, asking for more money to trade with. But what would happen next was greater than anything he could have predicted. We're blessed to have decades of data to guide our predictions, but you still have to separate the signal from the noise. Global media outlets spent years saying we were going to be free from inflation, but analysts are backtracking, while billionaires like Warren Buffett are liquidating billions worth of their stocks. Are they going to escape another massive crash and leave everyday investors holding the bag once again? We don't know. But as long as the interest rate crisis continues, it is better to be proactive. For centuries, society's elites insulated their stock holdings with uncorrelated safe haven assets. And today's sponsor, Masterworks, is giving you access to the most exclusive of them all, blue chip contemporary art, from legendary artists like Picasso, Basquiat, and Banksy, right from your smartphone. Masterworks' team of Ivy League data scientists and art experts have crunched decades of art auction data, and they have successfully used that data to pay out over $45 million in returns to their investors, who weren't billionaires with art scene connections. They've had 16 straight exits so far, with all 16 delivering positive returns to their investors. I have personally invested in art through Masterworks, and although their offerings have sold out within hours, subscribers of this channel can skip the waitlist and get started today using the link in the description. In 1906, before Jessie could start networking and get insider information from the executives and directors of publicly traded companies, he first needed a respectable amount of money again. So he made another 50-50 deal with his previous business partner and with full confidence put every single dollar of their account into short selling the railway company Great Northern. Jessie did this again because he really believed that a crisis was coming and that everything would be crashing. After all, he had only been unlucky last time. And this time it worked out perfectly, and Jessie made again hundreds of thousands of dollars as Great Northern started to collapse. And of course, he instantly started spending them on an expensive Palm Beach holiday during the winter of 1906 to 1907. But Jessie knew the crisis was just beginning, and he had to cut his vacation short when he realized that some even bigger market movements were on the way. In 1907, the American economy was already in a recession triggered by the San Francisco earthquake. And now people had started whispering about rumors that America was running out of cash. Slowly people lost their trust in the banks, so they tried to withdraw the savings they had deposited. But the banks had used these deposits to make loans and investments, and didn't have enough physical cash at hand to give it to everyone who wanted it. This lack of cash also made it much more expensive for investors, companies, and households to borrow money from these banks. And in October of 1907, things got even worse when banks, which were desperate for cash, started forcing investors to pay back the loans they had made when investing in different companies. Of course, this would only be possible if the investors sold their stocks in those companies, which in turn led to stock prices falling even further. So in October 24th of 1907, everything came crashing down and the market collapsed. But while everyone else was panicking in what would be forever known as a 1907 banking crisis, Jessie Livermore, who had seen this coming for a long time, was making unbelievable amounts of money. And this time he kept his emotions in check, perfectly following his own system, even making sure to only short sell the stocks slightly more than he bought the same stocks. So when the rest of the traders looked at him, it wouldn't be as obvious that he was short selling the entire market, which meant that they wouldn't be fighting him with their own manipulation tactics. But even after making hundreds of thousands of dollars shorting the market, this was just the beginning. Because while the market kept crashing down during the banking crisis, Jessie noticed something strange when he looked at the ticker tape. Suddenly, a lot of orders were coming in trying to buy a lot of different stocks all at the same time. It was almost like something had been coordinated behind the scenes. But this time Jessie had learned from his mistakes, and by making use of all his new contacts, he quickly got hold of insider information that a famous financier going by the name JP Morgan is teaming up with numerous bankers and executives to buy up and save all the stocks that were crashing in order to rescue America from what could be a catastrophic financial crisis. When Jessie heard about this, he quickly changed direction, covering all his short positions and instead buying stocks in the same companies. It was the perfect timing, as the entire stock market started recovering thanks to the help of JP Morgan and his team, which meant that Jessie had made money both on the downswing and the upswing, ending up with an account of more than $1 million, meaning that Jessie could for the first time in his life call himself a millionaire, although that is equivalent to $33 million today. This time, Jessie bought himself a 202-feet yacht and started cruising around Florida, showing off his wealth to the upper-class Americans at the Columbia Yacht Club. At this point, Jessie could have stopped his trading and lived a comfortable upper-class lifestyle. But in his mind, he had only just started. Jessie was still just one of many successful traders in America. He had nowhere near the fame and recognition he wanted. And worst of all, he still felt like no one believed in his abilities, thinking that he had just been lucky. But in an attempt to prove himself and show that it wasn't just luck, Jessie was about to make one of the biggest mistakes of his life. He was about to be betrayed by someone he trusted. As Jessie was celebrating his big wins and cruising through Florida with his 202-foot yacht in the winter of 1907, a nagging doubt lingered within him. Although he never told anyone else, he couldn't shake the feeling that his millionaire status might have just been a stroke of luck. To Jessie, the stock market was a complex game, and even if he was a genius at studying charts, reading the tape, and intuitively feeling where the price is going to go, there was still a human element within the stock itself that could ruin everything. After all, he had already lost once after a company announced an extra dividend, something Jessie had no control over and could never have predicted. So in his search to find a more predictable landscape, Jessie shifted his focus to trading commodities, because the prices of items like orange juice, rice, and coffee weren't swayed by boardroom decisions about dividends. And not only that, Jessie had stumbled upon what seemed like a golden ticket. In commodities, there's a spot market and a futures market, where in the spot market, if you buy bread, you receive it right away on the very same month. But in the futures market, a baker can agree to sell bread at a set price today, but deliver it many months later. This system helps protect the baker or any producer against sudden price fluctuations. The futures market offered an interesting opportunity that Jessie quickly spotted. For example, he could buy a mountain of bread today without having to worry about actually receiving anything until months later. And by then, he could have already sold it to someone else, hopefully making a profit on the way. At the same time, Jessie realized that he didn't need to buy that much of a commodity in order to control its price. You could imagine yourself what would happen if a single person owned all the sugar in the world. Then they could essentially control the price tag. So with this in mind, Jessie set his eyes on the cotton market. And to not raise any suspicion, he started to secretly and gradually buy up futures contracts for cotton, soon owning contracts for more than 30,000 tons that would be delivered months down the line in July of 1907. Now he only needed to signal to the market that he was planning to buy up everything else, to make the other investors panic, which he did by dropping hints to different journalists about his plans, which in turn led to the front page of the New York World having the headline of "July Cotton Cornered by Jessie Livermore." Jessie also used a now illegal market manipulation tactic known as painting the tape, where he would wait until just before the market was about to close for the day and then make several large orders to buy cotton, attracting the attention of the other traders. This strategy worked perfectly, and as the rest of the market rushed to buy cotton on the morning of the next day, Jessie could sell off all his own cotton at a higher price, turning his $1 million to more than $3 million, equivalent to almost $100 million today. Back then, the regulatory environment was much more relaxed, so things like this weren't illegal, and Jessie was shocked at how easy it was. It wasn't exactly the system he had developed over more than a decade of trading, but it felt like a money printing machine, and people had even started to call Jessie the Cotton King. So in 1908, the now 31-year-old Jessie decided to try again, and this time in typical reckless fashion, he would go all in with his entire bank account and using a lot of margin, betting even harder on cornering the cotton market. But while planning the timing of his next move, a famous commodity expert named Theodore Prince approached Jessie and told him that he had special insider information that the cotton price was about to go up a lot. Usually, Jessie would never listen to advice like this, but he really trusted this man and got a bit carried away, and soon found himself owning contracts for more than 100,000 tons of cotton, thinking he had made the right decision. But in reality, Jessie had gotten completely scammed, because while Jessie was pumping money to buy cotton, Theodore Prince was instead selling all of his contracts so he could get out of the market. So left with 100,000 tons of cotton, Jessie realized he had gotten tricked by his own scam, and he could only watch as the price of cotton kept falling until his broker forced him to sell everything to pay back all the money he had borrowed for the trade. And when everything was said and done, Jessie was once again left with an empty bank account and even hundreds of thousands in debt. He had again lost his luxury lifestyle overnight, and going from rich to poor multiple times had really started to take its toll on his mental health. But he still sent notes to all the different stockbrokers who had lent him money, telling them that he will be back and that he will pay every single cent back to them. The years between 1908 and 1915 were really dark for Jessie, and he fell into a deep depression. He was frustrated by the mistakes he made, and he felt an extreme amount of pressure from the world around him, where every move he made was closely watched by thousands of traders, and all his successes and failures were all over the news the next day, which felt even worse now that people considered him a failure. These periods of depression, followed by periods of intense energetic focus and passion for trading, happened to Jessie throughout his life, making some people believe that he had what is today known as bipolar disorder. After many years of struggling to make ends meet, in 1915 Jessie's debt was now well over $1 million, leading to him desperately declaring bankruptcy, which of course led to a New York Times headline stating that the Cotton King was bankrupt. It was embarrassing, and he had no idea if he would be able to start over again from zero. But something was about to happen that would reignite Jessie's passion for trading. The economic environment in America was building up to an event that would change the world forever. To Jessie's surprise, the bankruptcy he had applied for went through without problem, and the brokerage firms didn't really press him for payment of his debts, although they would still ask for their money back one day. In fact, the brokerage firms really wanted Jessie to return to stock trading, because his high-volume trades with millions of dollars resulted in large commissions going directly into their pockets. And so, around 90 days after the New York Times headline, a Times headline stated that Livermore's slate was clean. Although the 37-year-old Jessie Livermore now had $0 to his name, he knew exactly what he needed to do. He had learned from all his mistakes, and for the first time since the teenage years, he could finally put everything else aside and perfectly execute his trading strategy. After a lot of asking around, he found someone who was willing to lend Jessie his money so he could trade with it, which meant that Jessie really only had one more chance to make the perfect trade, so he had to be very careful. At the time in 1915, Jessie noticed that the price of steel was rising due to the increased demand from World War I, so this could be the opportunity he was waiting for. Jessie spent 6 whole weeks carefully analyzing the market, closely reading the ticker tape to understand the interaction between the buyers and sellers in the steel market. And then, when he finally felt 100% confident that the steel price was on an uptrend, he borrowed as much money as possible from his broker to buy 500 shares in a steel company called Bethlehem Steel for the price of $98 a share. And as it quickly rose to $115, Jessie kept holding and even bought even more shares, thinking the uptrend would continue for just a little longer. He patiently waited until the next morning and finally sold off all his stocks at a price of $145 per share. It was the perfect trade, and with that small starting money, Jessie was finally back in the game. In only a couple of months, he turned those profits into more than $145,000, and by 1917 he had turned that into more than $4 million, which meant that he could pay back all his debts from his catastrophic loss trading the cotton market. And to not make the same mistake as last time, Jessie, who was now in a good headspace, also invested around $800,000 into annuities, which is a very safe investment where you pay pay an insurance company a certain amount of money, and in return they will pay you a steady stream of income for many decades. This was important for Jessie because now he could make sure that his family always had a secure income no matter what. It finally felt like everything had clicked for Jessie. He got married to his second wife, Dorothy, in 1918, and for once in his life, he didn't have that many personal issues going on. His passion for trading was like never before, and having learned from his past mistakes, Jessie had started to accept his losses earlier instead of holding his positions until he goes bankrupt. He now had a clear strategy of exactly when to exit his positions, even when he was making money. And then the 1920s arrived. Known as the Roaring Twenties, it was a period of economic prosperity, with mass production making a lot of new technologies affordable for the middle class, and the automotive industry, radio industry, and film industry all starting to take off. The United States became one of the richest countries in the world, and the stock market was constantly reaching new all-time highs, quadrupling in value just between 1920 and 1929. During this time, every day felt like Christmas for a trader like Jessie Livermore, who loved to do the opposite of what everyone else was doing. And in a time like this, Jessie felt like everyone had turned into mindless sheep, living in a fantasy world that was too good to be true. In 1923, to focus even more on his trading, Jessie disappeared from the public eye and got himself a custom-designed office in the Heckscher building in the Fifth Avenue, an office that gradually turned into his second home. Jessie wanted to remove all distractions, and he liked to operate in the shadows where no one could see his next move. His instincts were telling him that something historical was about to happen, and he wanted to be prepared for it. By now, Jessie had become a master at predicting when a stock or commodity was going to go down, striking big in 1925 and making $10 million this time by predicting that the price of grain would collapse during a time when everyone else were buying it. It was by far Jessie's biggest win yet, but still he knew that this was just the beginning. The stock market euphoria was way too intense, so Jessie continued to bet against or short various businesses from radio brands to supermarkets, and with his growing reputation, he would sometimes hype up certain stocks he believed were overpriced, only to bet against them later, aiming to cash in even more money. At this point, Jessie had reached levels of fame and success he could have never imagined as a boy living on a farm with his poor family. He was respected and admired, and most of all, he was a man people looked up to. But with this fame also came a lot of downsides that would be too hard for anyone to handle, let alone for someone like Jessie, who had a long history of mental health issues. Jessie would often have to deal with different mobsters who wanted to kidnap his two sons and hold them for ransom. And one day, two robbers broke into his house and stole almost $100,000 worth of jewelry, while a gun was pointed at Jessie's head. Jessie would also get bombarded with letters every day of people begging him for money, and the pressure from the media had reached a level that could break anyone. Any mistake he made would be amplified 1,000 times and talked about for days or weeks on end. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't stay private anymore, and his relationship with his second wife Dorothy was slowly falling apart, with Jessie being working in his office for long hours and not being there, and his wife drinking herself to sleep every night. But despite these things, Jessie did everything to keep himself together just for a little longer. He knew something big was on the way, and he couldn't let anything distract him from his trading. And so, before he knew it, the day had arrived that would forever change the global economic landscape and send America into one of its darkest times in history. But also a day that would lead to people remembering the name Jessie Livermore more than a century later. The year is 1929, and Jessie Livermore is sitting in his custom-designed office, consumed by his work. He had stayed at the office for weeks on end, refusing to go home and barely even going outside. Everywhere he looked, he started seeing suspicious signs that something big was about to happen. In early 1929, the Dow Jones Industrial Average had gone up more than 400% in just 6 years. And at this point, everyone had turned into investors, with the average American household eagerly borrowing more and more money to invest everything they have into a stock market that seems to be going up forever. Jessie already knew this wasn't going to last, but then he got an even stronger signal that something was wrong when he noticed that the richest and most powerful investors had started to slowly sell off their investments. Jessie was now convinced that the full-blown stock market collapse was on the way. The 1907 banking crisis would look like a joke in comparison, and no one could stop it. And this was Jessie's opportunity to carry out the biggest short sell in history. He essentially wanted to borrow and then sell as much of America's stock market as possible. But for that, he needed much more money. He already had around $20 million in his accounts and another $10 million in the form of his yacht and all the real estate he owned. So using that as his collateral, Jessie then managed to leverage himself up to the point where he had enough money to short sell around $500 million worth of American stocks, which would be equivalent to a ridiculous $9 billion short sell today. Now Jessie only had two more important details to figure out. Firstly, even a small movement in the wrong direction could make him lose so much money that he would get margin called, being forced to cover his shorts and go broke. So he really needed to perfectly predict the start of the market crash and carry out his short selling just before the crash would happen. Secondly, he had to keep his plan completely secret, because if anyone else figured out what he was going to do, he would lose this advantage. Or even worse, the other powerful traders could team up to pump up some of the stocks Jessie had bought to force him to cover his shorts and make him lose all his money in the process. With these things in mind, Jessie decided sometime in early 1929 that it was finally time to execute his plan. Using more than 100 different brokerage firms and multiple different identities, he started little by little to short sell large stocks that often acted as market leaders. He also made sure that all the stocks he shorted had showed signs of weakness, meaning they had started to go on a downtrend. Jessie also used a pyramid strategy, where he started off small and shorted stocks more and more as their price went down. But his timing was slightly early, and by the spring of 1929 he was down millions of dollars. But he still felt confident, and all Jessie could do now was to wait. And then things started happening. During the entire 1920s, household debt had only been growing bigger and bigger. And it was so easy to borrow money at the time that even novice investors had started to buy stocks on margin. At the same time, the banks themselves were also heavily invested in the stock market. And they were lending people using the money that their customers had deposited as their savings. To make things worse, the country also started showing declining industrial production. In October 24th of 1929, the panic finally began to set in, and people started selling their investments. But the most powerful bankers and investors still managed to stabilize the market by dumping everything they had into buying even more stocks. But it still wasn't enough, and 5 days later, on October 29th, on the day that would forever be remembered as Black Tuesday, the panic selling continued, creating a chain reaction where investors would be margin called by their brokers and forced to sell off their stocks, which in turn led to an even larger drop, resulting in even more investors being margin called. On the 28th and 29th of October alone, the Dow Jones Industrial Average had lost more than 23%, and over the next few years the market would lose almost 90% of its total value, equal to hundreds of billions of dollars. Known as the Great Depression, what followed was one of the darkest times in economic history, with mass unemployment running rampant and many well-known investors and bankers taking their own lives, having lost everything they had. It is unclear exactly when, but at some point Jessie Livermore finally left his office and returned home to his wife and her mother. When he opened the door, he saw them hopelessly crying, expecting to hear the absolute worst. But Jessie could only smile, telling them that he had just made $100 million, equivalent to around $1.8 billion in 2023. This meant that, adjusted for inflation, Jessie had become a billionaire through a single trade by betting on the downfall of the American economy. All his hard work had paid off, and for a short moment he was finally ecstatic. At this point, this story could have had a good ending, with Jessie and his wife living happily ever after with their 2 sons. But this is where things take an unexpected turn. As the Great Depression kept getting worse, the public needed someone to blame, and the man who had sold America short seemed like the perfect target. A tragic chain of events were on the way, and this time Jessie Livermore wouldn't be able to survive. Very shortly after his $100 million win, Jessie's personal life started going downhill. He already had problems with his wife Dorothy, with both of them cheating on each other and drinking way too much. But in 1932, Dorothy had enough and finally divorced Jessie and immediately married her new boyfriend, who she already had a relationship with. In the process, she got a $10 million settlement and full custody of her 2 sons, while Jessie had to leave their family home they had spent a decade in together. And then things got even worse, since Dorothy couldn't keep up the same expensive lifestyle without Jessie. She was forced to sell the house for only $220,000, only for the new buyer to tear everything down. Over the years, Jessie had spent $3.5 million renovating the house. He loved living there, and he had associated it with 10 years of happy memories. So when the house got destroyed, it was like all those happy memories with his family also disappeared. Dorothy then even sold her wedding ring, which said Livermore on it, for just a couple of dollars. All of this made Jessie feel depressed and humiliated, leading to his mental state gradually declining. And it didn't help that a bunch of newspaper articles had been published declaring him the Great Bear of Wall Street, which had caused the public to start to blame him for the Great Depression. This led to Jessie receiving a lot of death threats, even forcing him to hire an armed bodyguard. At this point, Jessie had completely lost his focus and passion for trading. And that's when the Securities and Exchange Commission, now known as the SEC, got created, introducing many new rules and regulations that would force Jessie to completely switch up his strategy. All while Jessie had a lot of pressure put on him. Tons of traders were still looking up to him and expecting him to take his $100 million and turn it to even more money. It was all becoming too much to handle, and as Jessie's depression intensified, so did his drinking. One day in 1933, the police were called when Jessie apparently went missing. A day later, while the police were looking for him, a completely blacked out Jessie was sitting alone in a hotel room reading the newspaper. With a confused look, he stared at the headline, which said that Jessie Livermore had suddenly disappeared. Seeing his own name on the newspaper made him wake up and return to the real world again. And realizing that he had been gone, he started unsteadily walking back home. His doctor later diagnosed this episode as a nervous breakdown with amnesia. In 1934, Jessie's depression got even worse. He was always a big loner, but now he was spending longer and longer periods completely by himself. And by the end of the year, Jessie had mysteriously lost his entire trading fortune and gone completely bankrupt, even though he had made $100 million just 5 years earlier. No one knew exactly how it happened, but it's likely that Jessie at some point had started trading a lot of different stocks, but then as his depression and drinking habits got worse, he just stopped caring completely. Maybe he had even blacked out again like the year before. And because no one else was trading with him, they couldn't take control of his accounts and close out the losing trades without Jessie allowing it. Although he had gone bankrupt again, Jessie still had a steady income from the annuities he had bought years earlier. So he decided to spend the last of his money to go on an expensive vacation with his now third wife, Harriet Metz, an American singer who had been married 4 times before, with all the 4 men having tragically taken their own lives, which in turn had led to Harriet having a lot of money herself. Jessie had desperately hoped that the trip would get him in a better mood, but his old self was never to return. In November of 1935, a personal tragedy struck Jessie. His ex-wife Dorothy had, in a drunken haze, shot their 16-year-old son. Miraculously, the boy survived, but the traumatic event deeply affected Jessie's mental state. But by 1937, after filing for bankruptcy and getting encouragement from his son who had recovered, a glimmer of determination emerged within Jessie, and he started to work on a book, hoping to not only bounce back financially, but also to share his stock market secrets, showcasing a system he had coined as the Livermore Key. Now, to be honest, Jessie probably just wanted to make a quick buck and pay off his debts. In reality, he thought that to become a really good trader, you needed a lot of experience and the same kind of obsessive focus that he had. But Jessie knew that people would be willing to pay a lot to learn about this magic method of forecasting stock prices. So after working hard on writing his book, he finally released it in March of 1940, inviting some of the country's most prominent financial writers and book reviewers to a buffet dinner, with the hopes of spreading the word about the book. And on March 10th, he had actually managed to get on the first page of the financial section of the Times, with the writer stating that Jessie's book attempted to present a new trading plan. But he then went on to say that it had never been proven if the plan actually worked or not. Aside from these criticisms, Jessie couldn't have published his book at the worst time. In 1940, no one really cared about stock trading or investing in general. The United States had just started to recover from the Great Depression, and people were slowly beginning to trust American banks with their money again. But they weren't even close to trusting the American stockbrokers to the point of investing their hard-earned money into various American businesses. Jessie's book was a complete failure, and with a deeply depressed mental state, he had reached the edge. As he sat by himself at a bar on Thanksgiving Eve of 1940, he thought of all the times he had managed to get rich, only to self-sabotage and lose it all. He picked up his pen and calculated a total debt of $365,000. And with the new SEC regulations, he had no idea how he would be able to pay it back. Realizing this, he then wrote a note telling his wife that he's a failure and that he can't carry on any longer. And then he walked somewhere private and ended his life. To this day, Jessie Livermore is considered by many to be the best stock trader in history, and one of the very first successful day traders. Although his own book didn't see much success at the time, he had given a couple of interviews to a journalist and friend named Edwin Lefebvre back in 1922, which turned into a fictional book called Reminiscences of a Stock Operator, which is about the life and the learnings of a stock trader, heavily inspired by Jessie Livermore as the main character. Although it was released back in 1927, even almost 100 years later, it is still one of the most widely read and recommended stock trading books in the world, which means that Jessie's legacy would live on forever, inspiring many future generations of stock traders.